And we would now like to welcome Sonali Chakraborti. We are so excited to have her talk to us about the case of PayIt, a technology procurement at the City of Toronto that sowed controversy from the outset and ended in an Auditor General's review and premature end to the contract. Sonali is a strategic leader, policy governance expert, and advocate for urban communities. Her expertise focuses on accountability, governance, and strategic policy. We are so excited to have you here. Please welcome Sonali Chakraborti. We're going to just take a second to switch presentations. While you do, we have samosas available. Now, if you would like, would be a great time to grab one. Okay. Yeah, is this one? Or just use the mic?
Yeah. Okay.
You're good to go?
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. I will just kind of keep in mind to project my voice, but if you can't hear me, just give me a little wave. So I'm really glad to be able to talk about PayIt with you today. So I actually wrote up this case. I think it was linked in the invitation, but I wrote it up as a teaching case. So it's really about lessons for public servants or those who are kind of going through graduate programs to become public servants. So that's the kind of approach that I took. But I want to talk about it as a bit of a story to you. It was really good to get everyone's introductions here, that there's a lot of people who are new to civic tech, maybe newer to Toronto than when this case took place, so might not be familiar. So I will try to kind of lay out some of the background. I'll just start by saying that I'm a policy wonk, right? So I'm not like a tech expert. This is really, to me, about policy and ethics and accountability, but it's in a context of technology procurement. So I'll just kind of, say that at the outset. I work at the City of Toronto. I advise on corporate policy. So I advise on things that impact the whole city, and I advise senior leadership and division heads when that happens. I did not advise on this case, so I wasn't intimately involved in this. But I think because of the work I do, this really, I really noticed it when it happened. And that's kind of the, I'm an observer, and it's from that frame that I tell the story. What the case is really about, particularly for those who aren't familiar, is that the city contracted with a US-based technology company in 2021 as a result of that, and the technology company was offering a solution for digital payment. So for members of the public to be able to make their payments, whether property taxes or other payments they make to the city, online. Where the controversy comes in, and I know I put in the title corruption ? And I don't allege corruption in the case, and I don't want to allege that here. The whole scenario that we're going to talk about is actually all in the public realm. All the information is out there. But I think there's lessons to be learned. And Toronto has a history of having a corruption scandal around technology procurement that took place 20 years ago. And a lot of the policies that Toronto has in place now came out of that scandal. So it's kind of important as a background context. So what happened here in this case is that this US-based company approached the city and said, we've got this great technology solution. We're doing this for other cities, and we can offer this to you. So that was the opportunity. And from a technology services staff perspective, they saw an opportunity. The barrier to that opportunity is that we have procurement policies in place at the city, and they specifically say that the city cannot entertain unsolicited bids. It's like very explicit. Even when something isn't an unsolicited bid, but it's just an idea of city staff, even that has to go out to competition. And there's very restricted situations where you can have a non-competitive, what we call a sole source situation, and all the more so when it's when the value of the contract is high. So when the value of the contract is low, there are a little bit more permission to do something that's a sole source, but definitely not when it's high. So In this case, my own, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the timeline around when I even noticed what was happening. So this unsolicited bid came into the city, and technology services started to engage with this potential vendor. Whether they knew that they're not allowed to or not is unclear. We don't know. But they did engage with them. And then the pandemic started in 2020, where all of a sudden there's this tremendous demand to have technology solutions as fast as possible. So on that basis, they kind of accelerated forward with this, and they proposed it to City Council as a sole source. Okay, so this unsolicited bid that you're not supposed to entertain turned into a sole source proposal by staff. And it went to what's called the city's executive committee before it goes to City Council. And that's when I first noticed it. So we had this executive committee meeting, which is open to the public, and members of the public can attend. And there were many members of the public there from the technology community, from Toronto's technology community. Some of you may have been there or may have watched this happen. And they were telling elected officials that how can you go forward to consider contracting with this company when no local companies had a chance to show whether or not they have the capacity to do this? So that goes back to the notion of competition. If there had been a competitive process, then local companies could have offered. What we didn't, well, I don't think a lot of people talked about this in 2020. So the timeline for when executive committee was considering this is 2020 is where we're at now. The city has since put a policy that they will not contract with anything, procure anything from American companies, given the tariff issue. But we weren't thinking about that back in 2020. At the same time, the city actually has commitments to local economic development. They want to, we have an entire economic development division that wants to support different sectors. There's a lot of sort of conflicting pieces here. And it's the community that came out to speak to City Council that really brought this to light at that meeting. And I'm watching this meeting and thinking, yeah, what's happening here? Why is leadership doing this? So that proposal, which was really supported by the mayor at the time, did go to City Council, but City Council kind of heard those complaints and said, okay, let's not do this yet. Let's send this back and have a competition of some sort. So they sent it back with the city leadership, and the competition they engaged in was a Swiss challenge, which you may or may not be familiar with, but really you're asking people to now do proposals based on the original proposal, which we go back to was an unsolicited bid that the rules prevent staff from even entertaining such a thing. So, that still felt not quite right from a competitive standpoint, but this time, they completed that process and City Council went ahead and approved PayIt as the proponent. So then they implemented this system, right? So the members of the public, some of them are probably happy. They have, the system to make their payments. What's not up here, so I, kind of gotten up to implement PayIt is, then you have a mayor resign, you have a by-election, you have a new mayor. And so the winds sort of change a little bit, in the background. One thing that City Council did do is ask its Auditor General, which is an independent officer providing oversight on government, to look into what happened here. Citizens are saying, it didn't follow process. So Auditor General, look into this. Were policies not followed? And also, is this really getting the value that we want? By the time the Auditor General does that review and provides a report, it's 2024, right? We've had this sort of change in our political leadership, and the decision is made not to continue with the platform. So that's the timeline of events. But what I kind of, and here's a little bit about what the Auditor General found. The expected benefits were not there. The policy and process was not followed. And also records were not kept, right? It's when I hear things like records are not kept by staff that you have like, okay, is there more going on here than just maybe the ignorance of following policy, not following policies and that sort of thing. What I think is sort of like the dilemmas or like the issues that I think it's worth discussing is, what are some of the positives like that happened here? Yes, there was an independent officer to go to. Yes, they did an overview. Okay, a decision could be changed. That kind of seemed like didn't follow process at the outset. But that took 4 years. That took investment, and then lost, like all sorts of lost costs that went on. The lessons for public servants is how to not go down this path, right? If the dilemma is between, what's the best deal for technology? We don't even know what the best deal would have been, right? Because there wasn't a competition. There was an assumption that PayIt has the best option. There is also I would say some discourse that policies and procedures that take longer, or what might have prevented the procurement of PayIt, are red tape. I think we hear that a lot, right? Government rules, things are slow. Why does it take forever to go through something? But then the flip side of that is, what about fairness, right? What about, what if there could have been a better technology solution? What if the technology solution we would have picked would have lasted longer, wasn't rooted in this controversy, right? So I think there's a weighing here that we must do between these two things. And then there's, what does good governance, transparency, and accountability really mean? So I feel like I talk about those words a lot. I feel like in most settings, people are like, what does that mean? And those are boring words. And how is that real? But I think a case like this is where we can bring to life, like, what do we mean by good governance? Where you have policies and procedures for a reason, and it allows you to have fairness and transparency and open decision making. Where I think there was, measures that really had impacted the process, or has potential for impacting, is the fact that the city's process includes public comment on decisions. The fact that it was the community in Toronto that came out to make comment is what made the pause and led to the Swiss challenge. It's what created the opportunity for the Auditor General to review, and what created the opportunity for the decision to be reversed. Without that kind of engagement, I don't know that you can influence decision makers. And it's a feature of municipal government that is actually not there for the other orders of government. Okay, in provincial and federal governments, you have cabinet-based decision making. It's by nature secret. You don't actually get to hear how they deliberate, but in municipal government, you do. So the lessons to me in this scenario is the ability to have open meetings, that all deliberations by city council is done in open, that there's that opportunity to speak to decision makers, and that we have an engaged public. That red tape matters, that there's a purpose for processes, steps, oversights, and policy, and then there becomes risk to corruption if that's outweighed for a desire for agility. One of the things that I have put in the case for learning, for students is, what were the options that public servants could have taken? So technology services really wants to go forward with PayIt, and you've got, procurement staff and others telling them, oh, hold on, like, we've got these policies in place. To me, from where I sit in corporate policy, it's like, hey, if there's an incongruence between our policy objectives and our technology objectives, that's the time to consider policy updates. Maybe there needs to be some loosening. Maybe we should change some of our processes. Maybe the scandal of 20 years ago doesn't mean we still have to be this rigid, but instead of kind of moving forward with an unsolicited bid, which is completely in disregard of the policy, the opportunity is there actually to take that and then change and update policy. That's actually something that hasn't happened in this case. What's happened instead is you have one administration, you go forward with it, then you have another, you've stopped the contract as if our job is done. But I would actually argue, we need to take lessons from this and make changes to policy. The last thing is that independent oversight matters. So having the independent officers that we have, so we have an Auditor General in Toronto, but we also have a lobbyist registrar. So there's a lot of transparency and regulation to lobbying, an integrity commissioner who oversees the conduct of elected officials, and an ombudsman who looks into fairness for public servants. So those offices came in after the scandal 20 years ago. So again, it's helpful that we have that, but we want to get to a place where public servants are making better decisions before we get to auditor reports. So I just thought that, including this quote, which, maybe you can see, but I'll read it to you. Is it better to buy locally? So governments buy billions of dollars worth of goods and services every year, and it's often desirable to favor local service providers so that you have the economic ripple effects of government spending. On the other hand, you've got this global marketplace and the pursuit of the greatest savings and the greatest expertise, or the best deal. So that shouldn't just be stopped at the border, right? This is kind of the counter to our tariff situation. But this is a quote from 2005 when we had the judicial inquiry that I'm mentioning of the corruption scandal. So the same kind of dilemmas that we face now were being commented upon by that judge back then. So I've got now questions for you, and I would, I'm happy to take your questions because I've kind of given you the big picture of this case. And if you want to dive into some more of the details, I'm happy to do that. But I want to hear from you too about how you feel the city handles technology innovation, and in the context that we're in now, what you think of buying local, and whether you think we have open and transparent government.
Thank you so much. So we will now go into a question and answer period. Folks in the room, if you have a question, raise your hand. Folks online, pop a Q in the chat. We'll do a few in the room, a few online, go back and forth as time allows. And if we run out of time, as it seems we will, Sonali has generously agreed to host a breakout session afterwards where the discussion can continue. Hands in the room. One, two,
Find one here with vengeance.
Thank you for the presentation. That was awesome. I'm really inspired but also disappointed to hear that that the community's voice played such an important role in sort of surfacing the issues and enabling the everything that came after. And I mean, inspired because it's great because folks in our community notice these kinds of things happening at the city all the time, or versions of this, right? But disappointing because, like, why is it on us to like raise the flag on these things, and like how are we supposed to find the time and energy to be doing that, holding the city to account in that way?
So I guess so. I'm going to be as frank as I can be. But I feel like the tensions and pushes and pulls in our political reality right now, and I'm not talking about Toronto's government, is that elected officials will just respond to what they feel is impacting, like their electoral chances or even just their like favorability. And so that's why the community voice is what matters. Like, it's almost like there's a mistrust from elected officials to public service. Sometimes it's a mistrust, or sometimes like there could be other factors, but if it can get in that public forum, that's impacting them. That's one thread, right? Another is, like, I really think in this case, there was, senior leaders who had come from the private sector who felt that this is how you do technology procurement. And in the private sector, you probably do. Like, nobody cares. Like, you could just contract with PayIt. Like, you don't have an obligation for fairness. You don't have an obligation for local economic development. So they're like, this is how you do it. You guys don't know how to do it. Look how slow you are at the city. I know how to do it. And this is the way to do it. So there's a total disregard for other public servants then saying, oh, wait, we have a policy for this reason or procedure. So, like, there's no appetite for hearing each other. I think that's unfortunate that we've come to that place, like, where we could appreciate what someone's bringing from the private sector, but not like everything about government is bad. So anyways, that's another threat. There's probably like more that I could speak to, but anyways, those are a few.
Hi, thank you. Really interesting, especially for someone who doesn't know much about this. It was really interesting to hear that. You mentioned some lessons there about, what we could all learn from this. My question is, do you think that the current processes and the rules that are in place in the city at the moment allow for those things that need to happen as a result of those lessons? Or do you think we need to be advocating for further change at the city to make sure that those things happen?
I mean, I think that you have like a fairly robust starting point, that it's actually required that the meetings are open, decisions are open, that like there's a fair bit of rigor around that, that there's, you know, like freedom of information legislation is really robust. You have these oversight officers. So I think structurally there's quite a lot. I don't know that that you're advocating like for the system. I feel like what I would like to see is like a greater motivation on the part of individual people to believe in public service values and ethics, and that's what they live by. Like we created legislation for ethics for the public service. Like I was a part of that 10 years ago, and we don't even see the leadership living by it, much less like inspiring the public service to be like, you know, working in the government is not like working in the private sector. You hold the trust of the public, you have a fiduciary responsibility of like all of those kind of values. Instead, there's this, oh, people in the private sector just are magically better at things and we need them. What about enculturate, you know, the culture of those values? I feel like that's a real gap, and that's at the heart of what was going on here. So I don't know how you advocate for that, because I think it's I just think it's a broader community-wide issue. Like it's not, it comes with the criticism of government too, right? So.
Can I go once? I do have a request. I want to point out one thing. Have you ever tried doing or being a participant of the procurement process? Because honestly, the procurement process in the city of Toronto currently goes like, I need every bloody feature that exists only in this one app that you can buy, and everyone else is just shoved off to the side. Any features that we are looking for, any features that we want, anything that we are interested in, is just like, yeah, it doesn't come as a package from XYZ company, so why the hell will we consider you? The current process that the city is following is so bureaucratic. And actually, any purchase manager that does a purchase order above $1 million should be fired then and there itself, because if the person is not able to break things down for smaller companies to participate in something, what is the use of that purchase manager even existing as a role?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've actually taken out something that John is actually speaking on, and I've taken it a bit further. John, if you would like to go ahead and reiterate it. The process is so bureaucratic and it's unhelpful for anyone to do anything in there. And it's for millions of bucks. It's not for small things. Why have it? John, would you like to take ahead with this, or would you want me to pass this back?
Sorry, when you say John, are you speaking to me?
John had a message. You had a message that you had put up online. I was literally talking on the same lines as you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, for people, and I'm sorry to jump ahead of Karishma and Ahmed. In my experience, Toronto's bureaucratic procedures are not transparent. They're constantly beholden to agendas, and that's true across the board. When it comes specifically to technology, my experience working on a joint project between the City of Toronto, Code for Canada, and Civic Tech tells me at least some city workers have optimistically a tendency to scrutinize and pessimistically a deep suspicion of joint development projects and processes. In other words, there tends to be, particularly when it comes to the citizenry and means of developing software in collaboration, there's kind of there are definitely people who think in terms of a moat around City Hall. And that's what I've got to say.
And with all of us over here, the kind of audience we've got today, Priya, just wanted to point it out. We have tried ourselves to go for your request for proposals for City of Toronto. They are horrible. Horrible to the extent not a regular human, not even an AI, not even a super intelligent being can pass through it unless you know everyone within the City of Toronto. I'm sorry, nobody can pass or fulfill a request for proposal.
Ashish, appreciate the input. Very curious. Yeah, curious to hear from our presenter. I know a lot was said. What comes to mind for you from what was your?
I think what comes to mind for me is that the public servants, like, like if we don't work in procurement, let's say I work in my division and I need to procure something, I have to work with our colleagues in procurement. We're equally frustrated. Like there is systemic issues with like everything involved in the process. I don't know that everything involved in the process has to do with transparency and accountability, and that's why it's there. Sometimes it's like scale of the government. Like there's something else, but we are also frustrated that it's very difficult to go through procurement when we want services. And I can like only imagine when people are trying to bid. It's it's a little bit separate. Like I don't think that our staff should go after unsolicited bids because the process is bad, right? Like that's not advancing anything from a competitive standpoint. I don't think I mentioned, but like every public servant that was had touched this case in some way is no longer they either retired from the city or they've moved around or whatever. So, like I've at least talked to the former chief procurement officer, not so much about whether procurement is messed up, but like just how it felt for him to be put into the middle and stuff, right? So, who's solving that issue too, right? So,
Makes sense. Thank you. I know we had a couple more questions online, and then we'll take one or two more in the room. I know there's a lot of discussion that we want to have. Graciously, there will be a breakout room afterwards. I think we had from Ahmed and Karishma.
Yeah. So I had a question about the incident. So the last known incident of irregularity, like which is also categorized as corruption, though you didn't categorize this incident as a corruption. So that happened in early 2000, and since then, this PayIt happened, and it started in 2020, but it was known in 2024 that there were irregularities. So all those years between like 20 to 22 years, nothing happened. All was fine and dandy. I'm sure millions of dollars of project must have been sourced out, and so nothing. We were not able to catch anything, and they fell through the cracks.
I don't know if I would say it fell through the cracks. Like they implemented, like they took the decision in 2021 and went ahead and implemented. So I think the Auditor General would need to have had some time to get data of how it's going. Like what they were asked to do is the platform giving the value that was intended, right? So it ran for 2 years, right, before a report came forward. So like that seems relatively quick to me, actually. So.
Makes sense. Thank you. We had a question from Karishma.
So I wanted to ask, so you mentioned in the middle of this whole timeline, we had a by-election come up, and
Yes.
and that can change priorities. So I was wondering, like, with projects like these and others, how much of have you noticed decision making can change, but suddenly every 4 years change of government, now we're going to do something very different with this. Does that happen a lot? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say it does. Yeah, I think if you went across other types of topics, there's been a definite change when you have a change in administration, and you had a mayor for like 9 years, right? So you start to have you start to forget what a change in administration looks like. So, but yeah, I think there's been a lot of changes.
And I was just wondering, just like with tech projects, does that affect the timelines of these things, or even the procurement process? And how do we deal with that, I guess, if it does?
I don't know that the change in elected officials changes the timelines and things, because like the processes are in place, but there have been changes to procurement in the last 1 year. So like with the change on the US piece, there's been some other cascading changes around the amount of money that like public servants can go ahead and do procurements without going to city council. Like I feel like a few more things have happened, even if that's not related to the tariffs. Like those changes have been brought in. So I don't have any specific examples of how that's like playing out, but yeah, but it's not related to the the change in administration.
Cool. Thanks.
One of the things I recall from that is when deputants started to question what the staff was up to, they got pushed back hard
Yes.
by is that care to comment?
No, that is what stood out to me. So to be honest, I think I was probably at that executive committee on another matter, right? And I'm watching what's was unfolding. And what really stood out to me is that there was a real defense of staff, particularly by the mayor. And then even, I think Councillor Perks had really questioned, like why staff were proposing a sole source when there was an unsolicited bid. And again, Mayor Tory was like really defending staff, like as if Councillor Perks is accusing them of something, inappropriate or whatever. I thought it was it was a real over defense, and that is where the ding ding went off. I was like, what's happening here? Like there is something else happening here. And it, which I would say Mayor Tory was probably really a fan of, wanted to see PayIt go through. And that was the undercurrent, right? So if you want to, this is where you could be an observer. If you just want to go and really watch things go through council and watch things go through committee, there's always things happening under the iceberg, under the tip of the iceberg. And again, what can you do about that, right? When you, if these are majority mandate kind of mayoralties, right? So I think people speaking up makes a difference, right? Because at that point, it's past the staff role.
Thank you very much. I know there's more questions in the room. Please save them for the breakout. Sonali, thank you again so much for presenting.